200 yards. That's the distance between a school bus stop and the front door of your house. That's less than 2 football fields. For most kids, it's a 30-second walk. You wave goodbye to your friends on the bus, toss your backpack over your shoulder, and you're home before your mom even has to call you in for dinner. For 12-year-old Jennifer Odom, that 200-yard walk was the last thing she ever did. On February 19, 1993, Jennifer stepped off her school bus in Pasco County, Florida, waved to her classmates on the bus, and started walking home. She never got there. Her family would wait for her through the afternoon, then the evening, then the long, dark hours of the night, and she simply never came. 6 days later, her body was found in an abandoned orange grove miles away in neighboring Hernando County. She had been brutally attacked. She was 12 years old. What followed was one of the longest, most heartbreaking cold cases in Florida history. For 30 years, 30 whole years, Jennifer's family had no answers, no justice, no name to put to the monster who took her. Investigators poured their souls into this case, tested and retested evidence every single time new technology came along, and hit wall after wall after wall. But they never stopped. And in July 2023, 30 years after Jennifer Odom climbed off that bus for the last time, they finally found him. This is her story, and this is how justice, even when it takes 3 decades, can still find its way. Jennifer Odom was 12 years old in February 1993. By all accounts, she was a normal, lively, active kid. The kind of girl who played the clarinet in school, who had friends on the bus she laughed with every afternoon, who had a whole life ahead of her. She lived in northeastern Pasco County, Florida, in a quiet neighborhood. She was not the kind of kid who caused her parents to worry every time she left the house. She went to school, she came home. It was just how life worked. On February 19, 1993, Jennifer got off her school bus at approximately 3 in the afternoon. According to her classmates who were watching through the bus windows, she waved to them as the bus pulled away. She smiled. Then she turned and started walking the 200 yards to her front door. That was the last confirmed sighting of Jennifer alive. Hours passed. Jennifer didn't come home. Her family began to panic. Calls were made, neighbors were checked with, and eventually law enforcement was notified. By that evening, Pasco County was mobilizing a search. Every law enforcement agency in the Tampa Bay area got involved. Volunteers fanned out across the region. A search of 60 square miles was launched, which is an enormous undertaking, the kind of effort that tells you how seriously everyone took the fact that this 12-year-old girl had simply vanished between her bus stop and her front door. Her classmates, when interviewed, mentioned something they had seen from the bus as it drove away. A faded blue pickup truck had been slowly following Jennifer as she walked. It didn't stop, it didn't speed up, it just crept along behind her, like something waiting for its moment. That blue truck would become the centerpiece of the investigation for the next 3 decades. For 6 days, Jennifer Odom was simply missing. Her family was in agony. The community was terrified. Parents in Pasco County were keeping their kids inside, driving them to bus stops they used to walk to, checking in with neighbors. The fear was real, and it was everywhere. Then, on February 25, 1993, 6 days after Jennifer disappeared, a couple out searching an abandoned orange grove in southwest Hernando County made a devastating discovery. They found a body. It was Jennifer. She had been brutally attacked and murdered. The medical examiner confirmed she had suffered terribly before she died. Hernando County Sheriff Al Ninehurst, speaking 30 years later, would only say that the word brutal was an understatement when describing what had been done to her. The grief that rolled through Pasco and Hernando counties in the days that followed was enormous. But alongside the grief came fierce determination. Detectives began working the scene immediately. They collected evidence, they canvassed the area, they chased every lead they could find, and they kept coming back to that blue truck, the one seen following Jennifer down the road from her bus stop. But in 1993, they had no suspect in custody, they had no name attached to that truck, and the physical evidence collected from Jennifer's body and the surrounding area, as advanced as forensic science seemed at the time, wasn't yet enough to definitively point to anyone. The case ground forward through the months, then the years. Detectives followed hundreds of leads. They investigated dozens of suspects. Every single time, they came up short. Then, in January 1995, almost 2 years after Jennifer's murder, a couple out searching a rural area of Hernando County for scrap metal made another heartbreaking discovery. They found Jennifer's backpack and her clarinet case. The same clarinet she had played at school, tossed away in the woods like garbage. It was one of the most gut-wrenching details to come out of the entire investigation, and it told detectives something important. The killer was someone who moved through that area, someone who knew those rural roads, someone who was local. The case was classified as cold, but the Hernando County Sheriff's Office refused to close it. Here is where the story takes a turn that will genuinely make your skin crawl, because it turns out that 13 months before Jennifer Odom was taken, a very similar crime happened in the same county, and the man responsible for that crime was already living, working, and breathing the same air as Jennifer's family. In January 1992, roughly 13 months before Jennifer disappeared, a 17-year-old girl in Pasco County was walking home after getting off her school bus. A man in a truck pulled up alongside her, abducted her, took her to a wooded area, and brutally beat her and sexually assaulted her. He left her for dead. She was not dead. She survived. DNA evidence was collected from that crime scene and preserved, but in 1992, DNA technology was in its absolute infancy. The sample was logged, stored, and waited for the science to catch up with the crime. Meanwhile, the man who attacked that 17-year-old girl, a drywall worker from the Pasco County area named Jeffrey Crum, went right back to his life. He kept living in the same community, he kept driving his truck, he kept going about his business, and 13 months later, in February 1993, Jennifer Odom climbed off a school bus 200 yards from her home, and Jeffrey Norman was waiting. According to documents that would emerge decades later, Crum held Jennifer captive for 1 to 2 days before killing her. He eventually confessed this to people who knew him, telling them what he had done. He reportedly said that something happened on the second day that angered him, and that was when he killed her. He took her body to that orange grove in Hernando County and left her there. Then he drove home, and for over a decade, nobody caught him. Crum had a lengthy criminal history that stretched back to the early 1980s, armed robbery in Hillsborough County, kidnapping and sexual assault charges in 1985, weapons charges in 1987 and 1988, domestic battery arrests in Hernando County in 1998, more weapons and assault charges after that. This was not a man without a record. This was not a man who had stayed off law enforcement's radar. He had been arrested repeatedly across multiple counties in Florida, and yet his name never came up in the Jennifer Odom investigation. Not yet.
Through the 1990s and into the 2000s, the Hernando County Sheriff's Office kept Jennifer Odom's file open. Detective George Lloydgren, one of the lead investigators on the case, dedicated years of his career to finding her killer. Every time a new technology emerged, new DNA processing techniques, new database capabilities, new forensic methods, detectives would pull out Jennifer's case file, pull out the stored evidence, and run it through the new tools to see if anything shook loose. Time and again, they came back empty. The evidence collected at the crime scene in 1993 had been tested. It had gone into the National DNA Database, the Combined DNA Index System, known as CODIS, and produced no matches. Hundreds of suspects over the years had been investigated and cleared. The blue truck had been tracked down in various forms hundreds of times, and none of them led anywhere definitive. Every lead evaporated. Every door closed. Jennifer's family lived with this for 30 years. Think about what that means. Think about going 30 years without knowing who killed your 12-year-old daughter, without knowing the name of the person who did it, without being able to look at someone in a courtroom and say, that is the man. 30 years of holidays, 30 years of school graduations they could only imagine, 30 years of birthdays Jennifer would never have. and all of it shadowed by the knowledge that whoever was responsible was still out there, possibly still doing what they had done to her. The Hernando County investigators never gave up, but the case felt, in some ways, impossible. Then, in 2015, something happened that would eventually break the whole thing wide open, though no one would know it for several more years. In 2015, Jeffrey Norman Crum was arrested in Pasco County. The charge was the rape and brutal attack of a child under 12 years old. During the arrest and prosecution process, biological evidence was collected from Crum. A full DNA profile was created. Investigators ran it through CODIS in the Florida Department of Law Enforcement databases, and they got a match to the January 1992 attack on the teenage girl who had survived. Crum was convicted of that crime in 2019. He was sentenced to 2 life terms in Florida State Prison. It seemed like justice, at least for that survivor, but the investigators who had never stopped thinking about Jennifer Odom kept digging. Then came the break nobody expected. Jeffrey Crum had a son, Jeffrey Crum Jr. At some point, Crum Jr. was arrested and convicted of a separate crime of his own, a different offense entirely. As part of that conviction, he was required to submit his DNA to the state database, as is standard procedure in Florida. When his DNA profile went into the system, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement ran familial comparisons, a technique that searches for genetic relatives rather than exact matches, and the result came back with a strong familial link to DNA collected in connection with the Jennifer Odom case. The familial DNA pointed directly to Jeffrey Norman Crum Sr. Investigators who had been quietly working the Odom case immediately focused on Crum. They began building their case from the ground up. They interviewed dozens of people who had known Crum around the time of Jennifer's murder. They confirmed that Crum owned a blue pickup truck. They confirmed he had been working in drywall and living in Pasco County area at the time Jennifer was taken. He knew those rural roads. He knew that orange grove. He knew exactly where the school buses ran and when. And then the investigators found something that made everything even more damning. Crum had confessed. Not to police, but to people he knew. According to court documents that would later be made public, Crum had told his own son what he had done. The documents quote Crum Jr. telling investigators that his father admitted to raping and murdering Jennifer. The son said his father told him he sees demons at night, and then Crum Sr. allegedly said, "Remember that little black girl when you were a kid? I did that." He also said he did Jennifer Odom. The documents also state that Crum told a woman he had later kidnapped and raped the same terrible admission, that he had taken Jennifer, held her captive, and killed her. He had been carrying this secret for 30 years, and in the end, it was his own son's DNA, submitted to a database because of Crum Jr.'s own criminal conviction, that sealed his fate. By July 2023, investigators had built their case. They had the familial DNA evidence, the physical evidence linking Crum to the area, the confirmed ownership of the blue truck, the corroborating witness statements, and the confessions Crum had made to people he knew. They took the entire case to a grand jury. The proceedings were kept secret, as grand jury proceedings always are, but the result came back swift and clear. The grand jury returned a true bill of indictment against Jeffrey Norman Crum for first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual battery of Jennifer Odom. July 27, 2023, Hernando County Sheriff Al Nienhaus walked to a podium in front of the cameras and microphones at a press conference in Brooksville, Florida, and made an announcement that 30 years of Jennifer Odom's family had been waiting to hear. They had identified the killer. They had charged him. They had him. Jeffrey Norman Crum, 61 years old, already sitting in a Florida state prison serving 2 life sentences, was now charged with Jennifer Odom's murder. Sheriff Nienhaus did not mince words about what kind of man Crum was. He said, "This is a bad guy who is very violent, who enjoyed violence, who enjoyed hurting people, particularly women, particularly taking advantage of them and raping them," the sheriff said. State Attorney Bill Gladson stood beside him and said the prosecution would seek the death penalty in the case. "This is every parent's nightmare," Gladson said. "This is the thing that keeps parents up at night about their children." Detectives also noted that they believe there may be additional victims out there, other people who had been hurt by Crum and never came forward. They urged anyone with information to reach out. When Crum appeared in court, witnesses described him as emotionless. He said nothing. He showed nothing. He requested a public defender and sat in the courtroom as if the weight of the charges meant nothing to him at all. It is almost impossible to put into words what 30 years of waiting for justice looks like from the inside. Jennifer Odom's family had lived their entire adult lives under the shadow of her unsolved murder. They had watched technology change. They had watched other cold cases get solved. They had hoped, every single time, that theirs would be next. Hernando County investigators acknowledged this at the press conference. The case had been slowed at various points by multiple factors: the long appeals process in Crum's 2019 conviction, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the meticulous work required to build an airtight case against a man who had been free for 30 decades. But Detective Lloydgren was there on that day in July 2023. He was there when the name was finally announced. He was there when the handcuffs were put on. I can't express the magnitude of the closure that this brings to her family, her friends, and to this community, Sheriff Nienhuis said, and the communities around Florida and around this country. 2 years after Jennifer's backpack and clarinet case were found in those rural woods, thrown away like they were nothing, Jennifer's family finally had a name. It took forensic genealogy, decades of preserved evidence, a familial DNA match, and investigators who flatly refused to let a 12-year-old girl's murder go unsolved. It took all of that, but it came.
The Jennifer Odom case is a story about a lot of things. It's a story about one man's monstrous cruelty and the damage a single predator can do to an entire community. It's a story about a little girl who deserved to walk 200 yards home safely and didn't get to. It's a story about a family that spent 30 years fighting for justice with no guarantee it would ever come. But it's also a story about what doesn't die. The Hernando County Sheriff's Office never closed that file. Every time new technology came along, they ran the evidence again. Every time a new detective was assigned to cold cases, Jennifer's name was on the list. They never accepted that this case was unsolvable. They never moved on. And the science caught up. Forensic genetic genealogy, the technique that compares crime scene DNA to publicly available ancestry databases, then traces family trees to find suspects, has revolutionized cold case investigations in America. Dozens of cases that sat frozen for decades have been cracked wide open using this technology, including Jennifer's. Crum's son's DNA, submitted to a database because of his own criminal conviction, created the familial link that brought 30 years of silence crashing down. Jeffrey Norman Crum thought he had gotten away with it. He had lived for 30 years while Jennifer's family grieved. He had committed another brutal attack on another young girl getting off a school bus, and even that conviction, horrific as it was, didn't immediately connect him to Jennifer. But the science found him. The investigators found him. The system, slow and imperfect as it is, found him. As of 2026, the case is proceeding toward trial. Jeffrey Norman Crum, sitting in a Florida prison, now faces the possibility of the death penalty for what he did to Jennifer in February 1993. He remains without remorse by all accounts. He sat in that courtroom expressionless. He showed nothing. But 30 years of nothing is over for Jennifer's family. They have a name. They have charges. They have a case that is going forward. And whatever the outcome of the trial, they know the truth. They know what happened to their daughter, their sister, their friend. They know it was not random chance that she was taken. They know there is a man behind bars right now who has been held accountable. Jennifer Odom was 12 years old. She played the clarinet. She waved goodbye to her friends on the school bus. She started walking home. She deserved to make it through those 200 yards. She deserved so much more than what she got. But she is not forgotten. She was never forgotten. And the people who refused to forget her, the detectives, the investigators, the scientists, and above all, her family, made sure that the man who took her from the world will spend whatever time he has left answering for what he did. That's not everything, but it's something. And after 30 years,
It's everything her family had been fighting for.